So in this video, I'm going to go over 1, an action that's been living in my head rent-free, 2, how I responded, 3, why that was incorrect, and 4, the drills that I'm currently doing to correct it. This action, which is wonderful, was done to me by 2 fencers. One would be Edward Goodwine of Glen Albin, and one would be Leandra Forte, a fire drake, formerly I believe from Anstiora. I'm not entirely sure where she is now. I would consider Edward to have an imperfect version of this action, and Leandra to have a perfect version of this action, or something very close to it. So I'd like to first go over both so that you can see what makes this action great so that you can utilize it. So we'll start with Edward's action. Edward sets up on guard, and he sort of comes forward for the attack. He brings his dagger into position, and he retracts his blade so that you can't mess with it. So as he comes forward, you can see that's an invitation right here to my body. Generally, I shoot for that invitation. Edward steps forward, retracts the blade, and then comes forward for the strike. Now you may notice a couple of things about this action. As soon as he does this, the threat from the sword is gone. It'll take longer for the sword to reach its target. When he steps forward, he's counting entirely on that dagger to cover. And then when he shoots, it takes an extra tempo. Now you might think, oh, well, that's easy to deal with. Well, if you're a trained fencer, you're going to be parrying a shot that should have come in here. And this is closer to what Leandra was doing. Leandra would start low with the dagger high. She would take a step forward, extending the blade in order to draw an opponent's reaction, which I fell for. Once the opponent moves to cover her blade, she both frees the blade, moves the dagger into position, and steps offline at the same time. Notice that when I step, I'm not moving my arm to parry with the dagger. I'm moving my body to the other side. That way, if I miss the parry, my body isn't still there. So when I do this step, I move offline, I do both things at the same time, I move my body offline, and it allows me to recover, to lunge again, to pass, all sorts of wonderful things. So again, that move, she's on guard, she steps and extends the blade, she transfers and moves both over, and then recovers after she hits her target. A truly wonderful action. All right, so then what did I do? Well, I'm fencing in a Fabris posture, or a Fabris posture, or a Fabris posture throughout this tournament, right, and throughout this practice, because my goal for this year is to fence properly within the constraints of that manual. So when I see that Leandra especially really wants that shot, she tried it a couple of times, I see that it's there. When she takes that first step forward, I gave her exactly what she wanted. This was a stupid thing to do. Because I gave her exactly what she wanted, I went, covered the blade, moved my dagger to the other side. Now you may notice something. A shot that goes in over is not going to be guarded here. So I got hit directly in the head. What could I have done differently? Well, first and foremost, don't trigger the trap, right? So instead of doing what she wanted, I could have forced a change of position, forced some other action. Whenever you see a trap, you may be tempted to say, hey, I can outsmart my opponent. Very rarely can you do that unless you have perfect timing. So, the other thing I could have done is a firm-footed lunge. Now the firm-footed lunge is, instead of taking a step, you're doing a sort of lean forward, putting a lot of pressure on that front foot. And at speed, it can look like your opponent is lunging. Now in doing this, my feet are a lot closer together, so it allows me to pass even more effectively, or pass even more effectively. So the firm-footed lunge can be a great tool in your arsenal. Now against Edward, he's coming forward, he's attacking, right? He's taking that step forward. And I want to just hit, but instead of making sure the hit connects, counting on parrying the blade, I should just hit and get out. So what did I do wrong other than die, right? Well, first things first, I took a full step in order to goad the attack, right? I was fortunate enough to fight both of these opponents multiple times, so I knew what they wanted to do, which is my first mistake, right? Generally, if you know what someone is going to do, that doesn't mean you should trigger the trap. You should force them to do something else, right? It's kind of like that adage like, oh, don't worry, I'll get it this time. You won't, right? As I learned. So, I should have, instead of gaining over to this side, right where the dagger is going to be, I should have maybe gained to the inside, right? That's going to make that overhand shot a little bit more difficult, perhaps force my opponent to change positions. Now, instead of doing a full step to goad the attack, I should have utilized a firm-footed lunge. A firm-footed lunge is kind of your option when people are moving their feet but are presenting a threat or have moved the sword in some way. And the way that's done is you sort of just lean forward. In most fencing postures, your back leg is bent, your front leg is straight, and you kind of just shift that over, making sure that your knee is not past your toe, right? It's a great way to cause an injury. So you kind of stop it right there, and you lean forward with your body. So, I could have done a firm-footed lunge to goad the attack, which makes it easier for me to move offline or do something of that nature. So what drills am I doing to get better at this? Because obviously I didn't do so hot, right? Well, first things first, I want to practice my lunge and my recovery, right? So when you lunge, you have your blade in place. You're going to do your lunge, pre-turning that foot, making sure that it's towards your opponent, and then going off in that direction. Notice my blade freezes in place. If I bring that blade with me, I'm removing the wall that's between me and my opponent. I'm shifting it over, which is going to open that opportunity window up for them to hit. So I want to make sure that after I do that lunge, and in the process of my recovery, I'm keeping that wall there. I'm going to do the same thing in the other direction, lunge, and recover, keeping that wall there. I'll do a better one, lunge, and recover, keeping that wall there. Now for the firm-footed lunge, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to do the lunge, but notice I'm just turning the foot, leaning forward a bit. I can still finish the lunge should I need to. This is the great part of the firm-footed lunge. But because my feet are closer together, the pass is a lot easier to do here. This is true for the vault as well. If I firm-footed lunge, I can get that vault in the other direction much more easily. So, the way I'm going to be doing this drill is as follows. So since war, I've been doing a simple advance and a lunge. Going into position, advance, lunge, recover, advance, lunge, recover. But now I want to include these two options. The overall idea of this is that I'm going to be able to set a pattern and then change that pattern based on my needs later on in the fight. So for example, I might be on guard, I might step, move, lunge, recover, step, move, lunge, recover, step, move, firm-footed lunge, pass in. And so by doing this, it allows me to create that sort of change in the middle of a fight after establishing a pattern that my opponent can take care of. I could even stab, oh no, I lunged low, exposing my head. Cover and step, right? So you have these options that you create by giving your opponent something to anticipate and something to react to. So, first drill. In guard, making sure that your secondary or offhand is close to your guard. Step, lunge, freezing the blade in place, pre-turning the foot, recover, pushing directly off, and then back online. You should be able to lunge directly again should you need it. Now, on the inside, step, lunge, recover. Now, lunging long is great. If your opponent's going backwards, you should lunge long. You only do a big lunge if there's no threat present and your opponent is moving their feet. If your opponent decides to change guards and step, great time to long lunge. If your opponent frees their blade and steps, great time to long lunge. But what about everything else? Well, here's where you would use the firm-footed lunge. So, same thing, I'd want to be able to step, firm-footed lunge, pass, get out. And on the other side, step, firm-footed lunge, pass, get out. I have only ever successfully pulled off either one of these techniques through a firm-footed lunge. In my opinion, from my experience, if I'm doing a full lunge and then I have to bring my back foot all the way up and then all the way past, it's effectively two tempos for my opponent to just go, no. And so I'm not a huge fan of this. So I prefer to use the firm-footed lunge to set this up because it draws an attack. For this exact same instance, right? I'm fighting Leandra. She has her blade low. I do a nice firm-footed lunge here. I know she's freeing her blade. She's gonna come around and over my dagger here. So I just pass out and away from the blade and then continue forward, right? Maybe from a bit further away, I'm fencing, firm-footed lunge, pass out of the way, continue going in. If I wanted to be somewhat mean and force another action, I could move firm-footed lunge, and then as that attack comes in, maybe I dip low, right? They're gonna come directly from my head here. I move it out of the way into this vault position. My dagger and sword are still together, and then I move off of the line. Hopefully that attack connected. So should you fence me in the next month, what should it look like? Well, first off, before Leon is called, expect to see me in this position, leaned back, casually waiting, because I don't like to give up my whole game right before a fight starts, right? Once Leon is called, expect me to move around from outside of distance. I'm trying to figure out how good my opponent's movement is. Are they good at matching my movement, or do they sort of pivot around? Pivots are easy to trick. Dynamic movement, not so much. Remember that when your opponent moves, the best time to take advantage of them is when they're moving that back foot. So if they're moving forward, they move that back foot. I mean, they can go out to the side or maybe step, but they're gonna have a very difficult time doing an offensive action, right? So I'm gonna be back, I'm gonna move into my stance immediately. I prefer the crab stance for feeling my opponent out. Nothing quite lets me know if they're gonna attack or not by just presenting that target there. And then from here, I'm moving to gain the outside, or I'm moving to gain the inside. And I'm going to be a little bit lower there, right? From there, I'm going to be doing one attack sequence. I'm going to move with my opponent, plunge, recover, move with my opponent, plunge, recover, move with my opponent, plunge, recover, move. By then, normally they're reacting a bit more. That's what I want. I'm going to move, firm-footed lunge, maybe even exposing something. And then as soon as my opponent goes for it, pass. Change it up a little bit. But it's easier to change that up with the firm-footed lunge. So let's say, for example, I have an opponent that likes to retreat. I move, I lunge, they're backwards. I move, I lunge, they're backwards. Can't reach him. So I might move, firm-footed, pass. I don't care how backwards you're moving, I'm gonna catch you. So this is gonna be my sort of game plan. Take advantage. I hope that this was useful. This is what I'm gonna be working on for about the next month or so. I'll do another update. It's April and May. Perhaps by then I'll have obtained some more insights, but I want to give this an honest shot and see where it goes. I've used the firm-footed lunge before to great success using similar techniques, but doing these moves from the Fabris position is a little bit different. Now, one thing that rattles around in my head is maintaining the position, right? The advantage of the Fabris position comes from being behind the guard, right? So when I'm here, I want to pass staying low. I want to make sure that my foot, or when I lunge, I don't inadvertently lift up and expose something that I shouldn't. So then how does this work with the Volta Tanda? Well, I've tried doing that lunge and staying in the Fabris position, but this is just so awkward. I don't really feel like I can move from this position. And ultimately, I feel like that trade-off, the ability to move, is worth the risk of straightening up a bit with the body, particularly for such a high-risk, high-reward technique. So I maintain the firm-footed lunge, but if I straighten afterwards, I make sure I'm leaning back as much as possible. My arms are in position. I take one step back, and then I'll re-lower into the Fabris position afterwards. So again, I'll firm-footed lunge, vault back, and then take one step, lowering back into the Fabris position afterwards for maximum safety. I'm not entirely sure if that's worth it. That's what I'm playing with right now. So update video. So since doing my last video journal, which I haven't posted yet, I had the opportunity to fence Master Ryan for about 30 minutes and Steph for an hour. Solid. And so here's what I've kind of picked up on the way. So after reviewing the video footage, I noticed that I'm moving my tip around a lot for no reason. Don't do that. Beyond that, in the Fabris position to fourth hand, it's very important that this aligns upwards with the face. When you lunge, it needs to remain there. As soon as you expose your head just a little bit, you're gonna get hit. Beyond that, I was practicing a lot with the firm-footed lunge, great success, but a couple of things sort of came up, particularly with the fourth hand position shot. So I'm here, I move in, I lunge, and instead of doing the full vault, this is an all or nothing maneuver, I've enjoyed doing sort of a half vault. It allows me to stay in the Fabris position and then lunge just a little bit better. So the same thing can happen on the other side. So generally, I'm in my low Fabris position. I might do a passing step with my back foot, lunge in with that back foot, and then if they come in at this point, do that slight pivot and then move in. So I found that this was pretty useful so far. Generally, the most important things, this Fabris guard has to be a little bit higher, not here, but here and here. It's easy to whinge that elbow out, so be careful for that. And that's about it.